I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies Video Edition. So, Josh, where were you in 1995?
Well, contrary to what I actually look like, I was only 5 years old. Everyone's going to think that I was older than that in 1995, but I was only 5.
You look like a large baby.
I just look like a big baby. It's the bald head.
So you were a smaller baby.
I was a smaller baby. Only about 5'11" at that point. And yeah, I do very distinctly remember we had a family computer like everyone else.
Did you have a computer room?
We had a computer room. Yep. It was this little tiny room in my house. I remember distinctly getting signed up with my parents for an AOL Kids account. Did you have AOL Kids?
No, but you know what? In 1995, I was 2. So, and we...
Oh, that's true.
I also lived in Haiti.
You're younger than me. I always remember that.
I didn't really use the internet until I was a lot older.
Oh, really? When was your first, internet experience?
Probably when I was, 9 or 10.
Okay. So that was after Y2K.
That's what I mean. This is 1995 is very foreign. 1995 computers are very foreign to me. But
yeah,
apparently it was one of the most important years in tech history.
Big year. Big things happened.
From the Netscape IPO, which Josh is an expert on, to the launch of Amazon, this was the start of Silicon Valley as we see today. And it also happened to be the year Fast Company magazine debuted. Our team here at Fast Company put together a 1995 package looking back at the year. I talked to contributing writer Jared Newman and global tech editor Harry McCracken all about it. Here's that conversation. Harry, Jared, welcome to the show. I believe it's your first time, both of you.
It is. Hey, Yaz.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So before we get to your articles and even the 1995 week project, where were you in 1995? Jared, I will start with you.
Let's see. I guess I was, 12 years old. So it's at my home in Connecticut.
Watching
probably
a lot of I don't know what people watched then.
Well, for the sake of, I don't remember just watching on TV, but for the sake of, PC stuff, I was graduating from, DOS and figuring out how to play Doom and X-Wing through the DOS prompt to probably still using DOS for that in Windows 95, but also having this whole new operating system to figure out.
Harry, what about you?
Well, unlike Jared, I was a grown-up in 1995. And in fact, I was a technology journalist, so not all that much has changed in the last 30 years. I worked at a magazine called PC World, which at the time was a big deal because one of the main ways people got their information about technology was by going to these monthly computer magazines. And there was an entire section on the newsstand of them, and they were very thick with information.
Mm-hmm. Where were you living? What culture were you consuming?
At the time, I lived in Boston, but I was coming out to San Francisco more and more often, and eventually it kind of made sense to come out here full time.
Yeah, I was getting a lot of video game demos through CDs that were packed into magazines, so that was pretty important at the time.
Those things were a huge deal. Those really helped with newsstand sales if we could mount a CD-ROM on the front of the magazine.
Damn, maybe that's how we should revive our business.
Worth a try.
So, to start off, Harry, I'll start with you. What was the thought process behind this project? What drew you to revisit 1995 as a year, beyond the fact that it's the 30th anniversary?
Well, full disclosure, last year we did 1994 week.
Right, okay.
And that was a lot of fun and turned out well. And so it was a natural thing to consider doing it again this year. We did look at whether it should be 1985 week or 2005 week, which might have worked. But as we looked at what happened in 1995, we realized it was a pretty interesting year. And there were a bunch of strong candidates for stories we could do. And we could put up a strong lineup, even though something I had forgotten is that 10 years ago, we also did a 1995 week, and fortunately Fortunately, it turned out the stories we did then were an entirely different lineup of interesting topics than the ones we did this time around.
What were some of the kind of strong candidates that you were most excited about? Were they the two that you both ended up writing?
Well, we knew right away that Windows 95 was kind of a slam dunk. Its very name tells you it was one of the big stories in 1995, and certainly one of the things people remember. The ThinkPad I wrote about was not as obvious. I actually had to do a little research. I started to search around to remind myself of the hardware.
I remembered 95. I really did not remember the ThinkPad. You know, like that was foreign to me.
At the time, it was big news. It was certainly one of the most prominent products then, but I'd forgotten exactly what year it came out. But the moment I saw it was 1995, I was like, oh, okay, this is my chance to write about this fascinating product.
Yeah, and in fairness, I was 2 and we lived in Haiti, so really very far from technology.
Wow.
Jared, I want to start with you. Tell me how you thought about writing about Windows 95. I feel like I hear about Windows 98 all the time. It's like the classic, interface.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you first my other idea that got left on the cutting room floor, which I still want to work on coming back to. So this is kind of part of the narrative for me. So, there was this program for Windows back in the day called Click and Play, and it would allow you to kind of create video games with like a graphical kind of logical interface. You have to know how to program it all. And so I was kind of into that. And then I got onto AOL and found people that were doing that. And then around this time, that was when they kind of opened up AOL and let you like use the entire internet. And so there was this whole coming online to the entire internet and finding like message boards and things like that. And so that for me was like kind of part of, it's like a formative like computing experience for me. It was kind of like moving through this whole thing.
You were a very smart kid, but yes.
Yeah. I still think it's worth doing. But I mean, part of that is just kind of also moving beyond, like I said, the DOS kind of interface and having this whole like graphical thing to interact with. And if you used a program like Click and Play, it was like Windows, and it was just part of, managing files in File Explorer and all that stuff. That was, there might have been a Windows 3.1 version at some point, which I can't remember. But I mean, Windows 95 is really when that kind of stuff solidified. So to get back to your actual question, this was, we were looking at things that were just kind of like still beloved today. You look at things like even just the color scheme of Windows 95, like those like medium blues and
so
like
reassuring
solid grays and
yeah.
teals and everything. And, these little icons for things like File Explorer and concepts like the start menu. And like, people are really like into that stuff. Looking back now, I mean, I don't think at the time people were thinking of Windows 95 as this being like design leadership. But you look back now and it's really beloved. And I think what I was trying to get at was like how much of this is just kind of cheap retro nostalgia and how much of it was like there's something else there. There's some reason that people still kind of gravitate towards Windows 95 beyond that.
Well, you kind of came down on the fact that it's like a very, it was like a really pure time. And there was also not, like, people were not thinking about stuff like dark patterns, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think that, part of this is like the internet was still very new as a whole. So that's kind of an element of it. But also, I mean, just, a lot of these computer concepts were just still being invented. And so there wasn't really space for that kind of stuff. And I mean, just a lot of the concepts of computer things you would do on a computer were a lot simpler. So that's part of it as well.
Now, I'll come back to Windows 95 in a second, but Harry, why the IBM ThinkPad? Why was it such a sort of revolutionary device?
Well, it's one of the very few products in tech history and where it's really true that there was never anything like it before and also nothing like it since. I mean,
you could say that about, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a failure, a tech failure, right?
there's There are some bad products for which that's the case. But,
Yeah, exactly. It's like good.
this was a great product which sold well, and yet for a number of reasons which I get to in the story, there was never a follow up, and by the time other companies could have imitated it, its time had passed. I also found it interesting just because it's all about mechanical engineering. Most products today have very few moving parts. This was a laptop whose keyboard expanded when you opened the case.
The butterfly design, never forget.
The butterfly keyboard. So it had this nice full-size keyboard in a case that was smaller than a full-sized keyboard, which was a remarkable achievement at the time. And unfortunately, the guy who designed it passed away some years ago, but I tracked down his brother as one of the people I talked to and learned a bit about how remarkably clever this guy was and how he came up with this thing that is still kind of astounding. I think to this day, if you see the ThinkPad 701 in person, it will blow your mind a little bit.
So Tim Cook was actually an IBM exec who championed the 701. Do you see echoes of that era? Like, what can we learn about his leadership that we're seeing today?
Well, I do want to be clear. It's a little unclear to what degree Tim Cook was involved in this product. He was involved in stuff like procurement for IBM, so he was not like a product person by any means. And he left before it came out, but there is some evidence that he helped drive the initial development of this. And I actually feel like most people kind of forget that a large chunk of his early career was spent at IBM. And I think that probably had more impact on how he runs Apple than you might think at first. When people criticize today's Apple, they criticize it for not being innovative enough and being too focused on logistics. Well, Tim Cook got us started as a very successful logistics person at IBM, and you still see that in the emphasis on what he brings to Apple today. So I think there probably is a connection, even though it's not readily apparent. And I hadn't really thought about it until I wrote this story.
Now, some of the article deals with the fact that, like, and you just said this, why we haven't seen another one, why there wasn't a second iteration. Talk us through that.
Well, even in 1995, people loved the idea of super portable laptops, ones that were relatively thin, relatively lightweight. And the issue was, at the time, the screens that were available to laptop manufacturers were not all that large. In fact, by today's standards, they were shockingly small. And if you designed the laptop case around the screen, you didn't have that much width. And so everybody up until the ThinkPad 701 solved this problem by making a smaller keyboard, which was kind of fundamentally unsatisfying. Particularly back then, people were used to nice, full travel, full-size desktop keyboards. And so IBM came up with this remarkable idea of making the keyboard expand by essentially having two slabs and having this internal system of gears and levers that took these two slabs and repositioned them so the keyboard created an overhang on the left and right sides. And so it was the first small laptop that had a truly good keyboard, and that was a big deal at the time.
If I may for a second, so laptops were themselves as a whole a pretty small market at the time, right? Because like I'm thinking about my Windows 95 use, and pretty much everybody I knew was on a desktop, and laptops were not.
They were great. I mean, laptops at the time had been around since the early 1980s, but the industry was still in the process of figuring out how to build good ones that would run Windows well and might be satisfying as your primary computer. And at the time, people praised the ThinkPad 701 for being thin and lightweight. Well, it was about as thick as 4 MacBook Airs, and it weighed 4.5 pounds, which nobody would describe as lightweight today. But at the time, it was thinner and lighter than most of the competition. But
even computers 10 years ago feel so heavy to me. I remember our IT department once tried to give me one from 2012, and I was like,
right.
I'm sorry. I know I'm low ranking in this office, but that's crazy.
a lot of the progress has happened just in the last few years in terms of figuring out how to make them thin, and stuff like USB-C has helped, and solid-state drives rather than hard disks.
Jared, I want to come back. Actually, first of all, Jared, did you have a personal computer age 12?
It was a family computer.
Okay, that makes more. I was like, damn. His family was
a core
rich.
memory of like being on the computer. It was in. We had like an office room that the computer was in, and I have
the computer room.
Like,
people had computer rooms.
Yeah, computer room, which is an amazing concept in itself. Maybe that's for 1996. We can revisit the computer room idea. But anyway, I had this like core memory of like my dad coming into the computer room and me having been on there like all day and all previous day, and him being like, "You're spending every waking hour of the day on the computer."
And you're like, "Yeah, we have dial-up internet. I have to wait half an hour for anything to load, Dad."
We did at some point get the second line that allowed you to use dial-up internet without interfering or without being thrown off when somebody picked up the phone to call somebody. I don't remember if that was in 1995 or later.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Oh yeah,
Now,
yeah, that's fancy.
I want to talk about, the appeal of Windows 9095 today. As AI gets into everything, as the internet has become this sort of like dark place, why do you think the design became so iconic? Like the sort of minimalist approach to the design. What do you think people miss about it most?
Well, for one thing, I don't know if this is something that immediately comes to mind for people, but one thing that struck me is like you can actually download like a self-contained Windows 95 app, and it runs on Windows or Mac or Linux.
Really?
Yeah. It's free. You can just run Windows 95 and play solitaire. It's amazing.
Oh, Spider Solitaire. Remember that?
They might not have spiders.
They just had spiders on the back of the cards.
In Klondike. Anyway, the thing is like how immediate it is. Like there's a version of Word on there, and you click on it and open it up, and it opens faster than Word does now, which is kind of mind-boggling. And like the start menu, you click and it's immediate. Like everything is just straightforward, and a lot of that was intentionally designed that way. Microsoft brought in designers to lead the design of Windows 95, which is something they hadn't done for earlier versions. They were kind of facing a lot of pressure from Apple to kind of step up their own design. They did a lot of user feedback, usability testing, constantly tweaking, stuff that everybody takes for granted now, but was new then. And it was all in service of making Windows 95 super easy to use if you'd never used a computer before.
And it was, back in the day, so much easier to use than Apple's interface. I remember.
Yeah, I remember like looking back to, magazine articles at the time, and even like the Mac people were kind of like, yeah, Microsoft may have caught up a little bit here, like kind of begrudgingly admitting that, some of the design stuff was on point. And, to your point, like it's all of that was kind of in service of like making it easier and more user-friendly, whereas now some of that usability testing maybe goes into like getting people to perform a certain business action. And that wasn't necessarily on the radar so much then.
As part of my research for my story, I bought a ThinkPad 701 that came
off
with
eBay. I saw. How much did you pay? How much did you expense our company for this? I want to know.
I'm still trying to decide whether I can get away with expensing that. I may put it back on eBay and expense the difference between what I paid and what I get back.
How much was it?
I paid a pretty penny.
I think you should do what air. You should do what you mentioned in the article, which is people modding it to run on modern PC hardware. I think
I've considered stuff like that. But anywho, it
send it to Jared.
Yeah, there you go.
It came with Windows 95, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by what a nice experience Windows 95 was. I don't think I'd used it since the 1990s, and I found it more pleasant today than I did at the time, just because it was very minimalist and to the point and uncomplicated. And
what did you use the ThinkPad for? What were you testing it out? What were the things that you can't do now that you could do then?
Well, I mainly just wanted to see the keyboard in action to refresh my memory about the experience. And that actually was quite helpful because it kind of sounds like a Rube Goldberg machine, and it would be weird and clunky, but it works remarkably smoothly, and it even makes a satisfying noise. So whether or not Fast Company pays me back for this expensive computer I bought, the experience of actually using it and seeing the keyboard in action again helped me write a better story.
There's
Well,
companies that sell there's companies that sell, right, like those like typewriter throwback devices where it's just like a nice keyboard and a minimalist screen that you write stuff on. And I feel like you could use that for that if you could figure out a way to get the data off of it.
The big issue is I have to press the power button about 40 times before it actually boots up.
Okay, fair enough.
Which probably would not be great for my productivity or its resale value on eBay.
You just need to hold it down forever. Remember, that was the thing you had to do for a long time. When I think about the expanding keyboard, I think about we've reported on this. For example, Samsung has tried, and I think now they've done the phones that sort of have a wider screen because they unfold, and you hear about so many. You have one. There you go. No, but they had a lot of trouble doing it. They were releasing phones that weren't working for a while, and I suppose when I read about the ThinkPad, I was like, no way this shit works that well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How much of a tech innovation was it? I mean,
it worked remarkably well, given especially that it was the first version they did. Although Tim Beheron, who's a veteran tech analyst and who writes for Fast Company, got to see it at some meetings at IBM before it was even released. So I interviewed him, and he told me there were some issues with users not really completely folding it and then tossing it into a backpack and having reliability problems because of that. So it did introduce some more complexity. Which
classic. Blame the user.
if they had continued with further designs, they might have figured out ways to make it a little bit more robust. But overall, I was very impressed with how well it worked.
Why do you think the idea of the folding keyboard totally disappeared? Is it just because screens got better?
Yeah, well, there's a super straightforward explanation, which is that the laptop screens got bigger, and most importantly, most importantly, they got wider. So you could have a screen that was as wide as a full-sized keyboard. And that actually happened later in 1995. So the ThinkPad 701 was announced in March of that year. And in November of the same year, IBM decided to discontinue it. And it was just kind of a very cold, objective decision based on the fact that they could take a wider screen that was a much better fit for a wide keyboard. And the next year, they came out with a laptop that did not have an expanding keyboard, but in every other way, it was much better. It was thinner and lighter and had a larger screen. And the expanding keyboard would have been a novelty, but it wouldn't really have offered any practical value at that point. And the computer was delayed a little bit. It was such a hard engineering project that it was originally supposed to ship in 1994. And it was delayed into 1995. So the window where this was of value just turned out to be just a few months. If they had figured it out early in the 90s, it might have been around for much longer.
I will note that Amazon is awash in folding keyboards, just standing like this one right here. Which
yeah.
I like that it kind of hints at that maybe a little bit, that you could just throw this into your back pocket or something like that.
And in fact, Lenovo, which bought IBM's computer division years ago, fairly recently got a patent on essentially an updated version of the expanding keyboard. And apparently they were thinking about it for tablets, and it might have some value there. Because if you are talking about like a 10-inch screen, there might be some use in having an expanding keyboard in ways that are not true of a 13-inch or a 14-inch or a 15-inch laptop.
Jared, as you were writing this article and as you were looking at the design, the Windows 1995 design, did you figure out how Microsoft kind of fumbled the bag so bad on some of this later on?
In terms of just the design of the operating system.
Yeah, I mean, 98 is kind of iconic. So they, had dominance for a long time. But at what point were people like, why is Apple's interface more appealing? How do you think about that?
Yeah. I don't know. Harry, you may have more ideas about this than me. I think some of it is like Microsoft as a whole kind of got away from being a really consumer centric company. Like 1995 was like peak consumer Microsoft in terms of like people lining up to get a copy of Windows 95 and install it in their computers. And they maybe tried a little bit with stuff like Xbox and Zune, and none of that really expanded in the way Apple really kind of became the cool consumer company. And I don't know why they so much lost sight on the design element of it, and why kind of Apple maybe they're just better at it. I don't know. Harry, maybe you have more ideas than I do on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the zenith of Windows design was Windows XP, which came out in 2001.
I remember getting that.
It was essentially a somewhat improved but vastly more reliable version of Windows 95 or Windows 98, and people just loved it. But it kind of felt after that like Microsoft had run out of ideas to make it better. And a few years later, they came out with Windows Vista, which is famous for being one of the least popular versions of Windows. And it had a big focus. It had a big focus on being prettier and having transparency and stuff. And people didn't really want that. And then a few years after that, they came out with Windows 8, which was a reaction to the iPad, and had a big focus on touchscreen stuff. And it also turned out that people who love Windows didn't necessarily want it to behave like an iPad. And in the years since that came out, a lot of what's been new about Windows has been backpedaling back to something that looks a little bit more like the operating system did before the iPad came out. And so I think even today, people kind of like something that's simple and straightforward, and it doesn't necessarily need to be gorgeous or in tune with the latest trends.
Yeah, interestingly enough, you talk to people at Microsoft and then people who kind of observe Microsoft, and they say like Windows 11 is the operating system where certainly not perfect by any means, but like they seem to have made a conscious effort to like throw back to some of the Windows 95 simplicity. They stripped down some of the start menu and taskbar stuff, which not everybody loves, but there's clearly an effort there to be like, hey, this has kind of gotten out of hand, and maybe we need to go back to basics a little bit.
Would that they put that effort into SharePoint, a program that I strongly believe is designed to ruin my life, because it's terrible. So one of the stated goals of this series was basically that understanding the tech of 1995 can help us kind of prepare for what's ahead, and also, say something about the tech industry as a whole. And I know that this is a very broad question, so take it as you want. But Harry, I'll start with you. How do you think this series kind of delivered on that? What are the biggest takeaways from that year, and what do they say about where we are now?
Well, we definitely didn't want it just to be a nostalgia fest. We wanted to have some lessons. We wanted to connect the dots to the present day. And when you're looking back 30 years, you can do that. And there are things that are completely obvious that weren't obvious in 1995, such as the fact that the expanding keyboard would have such a small period of relevance. And in the case of Windows 95, there was just like an enormous amount of hoopla around it. It was a brilliant marketing success. And in the fullness of time, that matters less than some of the decisions that Microsoft got right, just in terms of functionality. I think it's useful to keep in mind that right now we're going through maybe the biggest period of change with AI. And almost everybody in the industry is making these grandiose proclamations about where it's headed. And it's helpful just to remind ourselves that nobody really knows where it's going. And 30 years from now, there'll be things about 2025 that are completely obvious that none of us can quite grasp. And maybe Fast Company or somebody else will do a 2025 week.
There is a sense of, you look back to concepts like the start menu, the taskbar, and file explorer, and those things were kind of created in Windows 95, and they are enduring today. And I know people at Microsoft have a sense of like, with AI, that maybe they're going to be able to invent some new paradigms that maybe we'll look back as the standard 30 years from now. But also, we're a little bit more wary of that now than we were 30 years ago. You know, we were excited for these new concepts to some extent then, and now I think we're a little more cynical or a little more skeptical about companies wanting to reinvent the way we interact with computers, especially because, as we've just touched on a bunch of times, like they're not always necessarily having the user's best interest at heart anymore.
Microsoft, amazingly enough, is riffing on some of the same ideas it was in 1995. In 1995, it came out with this interface called Microsoft Bob that had these talking animals helping you with your computer, and that led to Clippy, which people remember much better. And just this month, Microsoft announced that it's giving Copilot this animated character as the persona, and it's really essentially exactly the same idea as Microsoft Bob or Clippy, except with way better technology.
What's it going to look like? Do we know yet?
The initial version is sort of like a friendly little blob who looks a little bit like a cloud, but apparently they are going to do Clippy and other characters as well, and you may get to pick your character at some point.
The sort of anthropomorphizing of shapes is always funny to me. I just completed our company sexual harassment training where every character in dialogue and making offensive comments is just a different shape. And I want to know who started that because it's hilarious.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we're switching HR platforms and we may no longer get to see the little geometric shapes working in office together.
Shapes.
No more triangles and squares.
Harry, or actually Jared, you can participate in this too. What do you think is the IBM ThinkPad of our time? Like, if you think of the past 5 years, what's something that was like great or really interesting but ended up being kind of a flash in the pan? I'm trying to think too.
That whole category of like listening, always listening assistance, which a lot of companies have tried to push.
Yeah, although none of it worked.
Is
Like,
there any
IBM
redeeming
thing worked. Yeah, exactly.
Right. There wasn't even really a redeeming like hardware advancement to go along with that.
Yeah.
So now I have to think about that some more.
I mean, I think the Humane Pen and the Rabbit were actually not great products, which makes them different than the ThinkPad. But the thing they have in common is that I think, with the Rabbit and the Humane Pen, there's this idea that this is kind of a separate category of AI wearables, and I think there's a decent chance it's not going to be a separate category. It's your smartwatch or your smart eyeglasses or even just your phone may incorporate those features in the same way that expanding keyboard laptops turned out not to be a category. It's just that all laptops got better keyboards.
Are you wearing AI glasses, Harry? You just went like this, and I was like, "Is that no?"
Sorry,
okay.
I was
like, "What's he seeing?"
These are just my normal Warby Parkers. So.
Well, I think this is a great place to end it. Thank you both for coming on the show and talking us through your pieces. And for our listeners, please read the whole series online at fastcompany.com. And subscribe to Harry's newsletter. Harry, do you want to give yourself a plug?
Sure. It's called Plugged In, and it comes out on Fridays. And search for Fast Company Plugged In, and you'll find it very easily.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yaz.